Good evening, this is Brass Tacks. I'm Zakir Jacob. There is a raging controversy over the new Netflix series IC814, which deals with the hijacking of an Indian Airlines flight back in 1999. Over 150 hostages were taken then initially to Amritsar, then Lahore, and then to Kandahar. And the then Vajpayee government at that time was forced to release three dreaded terrorists, including Masood Azhar, the founder of Jaish-e-Mohammed, in lieu of the free release of these hostages. Now, right-wing groups and now official BJP handles have taken offense to the use of the names Bhola and Shankar, which of course is in reference to Lord Shiva, as the pseudonyms of two of the hijackers. But in reality, those were the names used by those two hijackers while they were on the ill-fated flight. They've also taken offense to what they call a certain whitewashing of the crimes of the hijackers and their ISI backers. So much so, the head of content for Netflix has been summoned tomorrow by the Information and Broadcasting Ministry. It is likely that Netflix, on which platform this series has been broadcast, will be asked to make some changes to try and assuage these concerns. But the makers of the series are saying that this whole thing has been adapted to a book that was written by Captain Devi Sharan, who was the lead captain of this ill-fated flight, IC814, and that they're being as true to the book as possible. So the question is this artistic license or is this an attempt at whitewashing terror? But first, the story of how a hijack from almost 25 years ago has come back to haunt the nation's collective psyche.
Nobody thinks that there were some people from India who did the hijacking. So how the people have Hindu names in that movie, I don't know. But I'm very, very happy that the INV Ministry and the Government of India has taken cognizance of this and has summoned Netflix.
All right, so now the NDA government has taken a stand against the portrayal of terrorists in the movie, particularly the use of Hindu names as pseudonyms for two of the terrorists. Top INB Ministry sources have told CNN News18 that the portrayal of events in the series is actually far from the reality or far from the truth of what actually happened on board IC814. They also say that this is a bid to try and erase some concrete facts and replace it with some kind of fiction. The series, according to them, is normalizing what was clearly a crime against the nation. The hijackers were hardcore terrorists, and there is an attempt at whitewashing some of the facts, which is not creative license. So let's try and put this, both the politics of it and also the facts of what exactly happened for those dreaded 7 or 8 days between Christmas Eve 1999 and New Year's Eve 1999, when finally this ordeal ended for not just the 174 people who were on board, but also their families. Here in our studios, I'm joined by Pradeep Bhandari, spokesperson of the BJP, the national spokesperson. Mohan Kumar Mangalam is spokesperson of the Congress Party. We're also joined by individuals who were in positions of influence and power at that time, who had a front row view of what exactly happened. Ambassador G. Parthasarathy was the then High Commissioner of India to Pakistan. He was the High Commissioner when the hijacking happened. We're also joined by Mr. Sanjeev Sharma. In fact, he was one of the passengers on board IC814, and he'll be describing to us what exactly happened and the reality, the actuality of what exactly happened and whether the makers of the series have gone wrong there. And also General Ved Malik, VP Malik, who was then the Chief of Army Staff. But let me start with you, Pradeep Bhandari. This whole thing started off on Twitter and other social media platforms because some right-wing Twitter folks took offense to the fact that two of the hijackers were identified by their pseudonyms there on the flight as Bhola and Shankar. Now, we've spoken to the makers of this series, we've spoken to the people who've written the book on which this series is based, and we've also spoken to people who are on board IC-814, and they're all saying the same thing, that yes, those two terrorists identified themselves as Bhola and Shankar.
Saka, welcome. Thank you so much for having me on your show. Let me begin this debate by at least telling the people of India the real name of the hijackers and the terrorists. The name of the terrorist was Ibrahim Akhtar, Shahid Akhtar Sayyed, Sani Ahmed Qazi, Mistri Zahoor Ibrahim, and Shakir. Now, if this series is based on true events, it's a 6-episode series and it says it's inspired by true events. My primary argument is, if you are making a series which is based on true events, I understand you've made pseudonyms, but the question is that why have you not even once revealed the real identity of the terrorists? Point number one. Point number two, I also question the intent of the makers, because this is absolutely, as you said, on Captain Devi Sharan's book, and which is Flight into the Fear, the captain's story. Now, please note that. What does Anubhav Sinha, the director, say? And I quote the director: "When I was approached by Netflix, already had a script on Captain Devi Sharan's book on the incident. However, when I read it, I could not agree to the version of the captain because it only projected it from the captain's perspective and what was limited. So I rewrote it." So when the makers of the movie rewrite it, they do not adapt and take the movie as per the book, which is Captain Devi Sharan's book. So point number one is that it completely distorts the reality.
Pradeep,
yes.
There are eyewitnesses on
Yes.
board. I'll ask Mr. Sanjeev Sharma
Yes.
also, who is joining us, who are corroborating this, that for the
Zaka,
for the 8 days that they were held hostage, these two terrorists were identified as Bhola and Shankar.
Zaka, yes, but if a filmmaker is revealing to the people of India, is giving a story which is based on true events, is it not the duty of the filmmakers and the makers to tell the identity of the terrorists? Point number two, there are many instances in the entire Netflix series made by the director where it is humanizing the terrorists. For example, the terrorists are branded and saying to the captain, ki apna khayal rakhna, take care, if you need my help, please let me know. Point number one. Point number two, please go ahead and read about how Masood Azhar, a dreaded terrorist who's behind 26/11 and other terrorist activities, he's been treated as a peace-loving individual. So my primary question is, if a terrorist in a Netflix series is branded as a peace-loving individual who, because of circumstances, has carried out an hijack, then yes, it is my right to question, because it was at the end of the day a terror attack. This is the same mindset, Zaka, where Burhan Wani was branded as an innocent.
Okay, we'll come to the larger issue. We'll come to the larger issues, but let me ask Mohan Kumar Amangalam. So these are the litany of complaints by social media users, and of course now the BJP handles have also tweeted against it, that they have accused the filmmakers of distorting the facts around the hijacking. The central issue revolves around the portrayal of these terrorists, using names like Shankar and Bhola for the hijackers in an obvious reference to Lord Shiva is an attempt to try and whitewash and obscure the real identities of the terrorists. They are rewriting history for a generation Gen Z which is not familiar with the facts of what happened 24 years ago. They are accusing the filmmakers of downplaying the actuality of the terror by the hijackers and instead trying to humanize their story. Mohan.
Zaka, I haven't seen the series, so I can't comment on how they've built the narrative. But I can say that the beginning of the series, as many other series that are based on real life events but are fictionalized, starts with a disclaimer where they talk about how they fictionalize character names. It's a sort of a general boilerplate disclaimer that everyone who's not making a documentary, and it's only a documentary that's actually whose feet is held to the fire to see if the facts match up with what actually happened. It also, I believe, ends with the names of the terrorists who were released and talks about what those terrorists went on to do, whether it was Omar Saeed Sheikh, who beheaded Daniel Pearl, or whether it was Masood Azhar, the founder of JEM, who led attacks on Parliament 26/11 in Mumbai and Pulwama in 2019. The reason why the BJP and the entire right wing is up in arms has nothing to do with the fact that these people were named as Bhola and Shankar, which even official government documents have said is the aliases they were using while they were on the flight. It's because for a party that prides itself on muscular nationalism, claims to have an uncompromising stand on national security, the IC-814 hijack was an unprecedented capitulation to the demands of India's enemies. And what does Rajiv Chandrasekhar mean when he says Hindu names are Indians and now people will think that Indians led that hijack? Why? Other religions' names cannot be treated to be Indian. This violent communal thought process is the region BJP is on its last leg. Can't Muslim, Christian, Sikh, or Parsi names be Indian? What if they were called Adam, Roger, Supreet, Zaka, or Zurak? Wouldn't those be Indian? So this entire sort of communal narrative that is the BJP tries to build every chance they get, which is already fallen flat on its face in the last elections, is not going to give them any truck going forward. And like I said, this is not a documentary. It remains every single movie or series made on real life events tends to be dramatized one way or the other.
So let me ask Mr. Sanjeev Sharma. He was one of the passengers on board IC-814 amongst the 174 who were on board when this hijacking happened. He lived through the entire 8 days of the hijacking, went all the way to Kandahar, and then, of course, in this deal where 3 terrorists were released, and finally, after 8 days, these 174 passengers were released. I want to ask you, and start off by asking you, Mr. Sharma, describe for us what happened on board that ill-fated flight IC-814 back in December of 1999. What do you remember about the hijackers, and what do you make of this entire controversy around the names of 2 of the hijackers, the pseudonyms that are being used, Bhola and Shankar? Is that accurate to what happened on board IC-814?
See, I've seen the series, in fact, and yes, it's quite accurate. Barring what was happening outside, we obviously didn't know. So it very well corresponds with the book which Captain Devi Sharan has written. And I also wrote a book, and it was published by Macmillan, Terror on Board. So if you go through that, you'll see that this is exactly what happened. And there are lot of things which have been missed out. But yes, one thing for sure is that the names that they have been given in the series, they are correct. They are Chief, Burger, Doctor, Bhola, Shankar, and Chief was the brother of the terrorist who was released, Maulana Masood Asad. Burger was a Harvard-educated, very well-spoken person. Doctor was more of a cleric. He would tell us about Islam and, that when we go out and, what all we have to tell the world about Allah and, praise Allah, etc. Shankar was the youngest of them all. He was a very ruthless, murderer. He's the one who slit Rupin Katyal's throat and stabbed Satnam Singh.
Okay.
And he was one person who was always alert and I never saw him sleeping in those 8 days. So yeah, the names, as far as the names go, the names are correct. And I don't think Netflix has done anything out of the ordinary or wrong by mentioning the names as Shankar and Bhola, because those were the code names. So there is nothing, Netflix can do about it.
So Mr. Sharma, the names are one part of it, and you're saying, the names are authentic. Those are the names that they used. The other criticism seems to be that there's a degree of whitewashing of the brutality of what the hijackers did, the fact that they were terrorists, Pakistan terrorists, ISI-backed terrorists, and in a way, the makers of this series are showing these terrorists in a rosier fashion. And they're taking away or whitewashing the brutality of what the terrorists did to you and others who were on board that flight. Is that a fair criticism?
They were mentally brutal, though physically, initially when they hijacked, they asked everybody to keep their heads down, etc. And there were some South Indians on the plane who didn't understand, Hindi. So they bashed those guys up. And my brother-in-law was also there on the flight with me, who was highly diabetic, whom they let out in Kandahar and, let him go. That was a humanitarian, gesture, because I was with him at night when he was literally coughing up blood, and they said, "Aapne Sanjeev bhai, aapne pehle kyun nahi bataya? Ye hum apne sar pe nahi lenge." So then he burst out at them and he says, "Kya sar pe nahi bataya? Aapne itni dehshat philai hui thi." And I said, "My God, this is the end, because these guys are absolutely ruthless." They were kind of, brainwashed, ruthless, absolutely, who didn't realize others' pain. And there was an incident when he cut his toe on the glass, because a lot of glass was scattered around the plane. So he was squealing in agony. And that's when I thought to myself, I said, look what you have done. While we were exiting the plane on the release on the 31st, this fellow Burger, he was standing in the alley and he was crying inconsolably. And I asked him, I said, what happened? He says, मैंने बहुत गलत किया है, मैंने अच्छा नहीं किया आप लोगों के साथ. I told him, I said, अब जो हो गया भाई वो तो अब उसका तो कुछ नहीं कर सकते, पर अब यहाँ से जाके गायब हो जाओ और ऐसे कभी नहीं करो. Don't do these things ever again. If you want to prove a point to the world, this is not the way to do it. You're supposed to do it with dialogue, not with violence and hijacking planes. We are innocent people. We are civilians. We are not equipped to, come and, take a go at you.
I guess,
Anyway, a
the
lot of things happened.
the distance of time, 24 years now, is giving you that ability to try and look at what happened over those 7 or 8 days quite dispassionately. But I'm sure it was harrowing when it happened. But let me ask Ambassador Patsati, because he was the Indian High Commissioner in Pakistan at that time. The flight was initially supposed to go to Lahore. In Lahore, there was already military rule by then, Ambassador Patsati. And the generals, I don't know if General Musharraf was in on this, but at least in the series it's shown that one of the generals denies permission for the flight to land in Lahore. Eventually, the captain still does land it in Lahore for a brief while, where it's refueled and then it's flown to Dubai and then from there to Kandahar. What do you remember from your time back in that week, the last week of December 1999? Was there anything more that the Indian government could have done to stop this?
Well, to stop this would have required much better intelligence than we have or had. But by and large, I think we handled it well. But I must say one thing. We were dealing with ruthless, lying scoundrels from the Pakistani side. They lied to me about aircraft I asked for to take me to Lahore. They provided the aircraft so that I reached late. And this was a general part of their behavior.
Okay.
The other fact of the matter is that from our point of view, we wanted these people out without hurt, and we were not willing to push beyond a point which would in any way endanger the lives of the passengers inside. As I said, they took me, when I asked to go to Lahore, they took me late and the flight had taken off. That's the way the Pakistanis behave. And if you go through this, it was well planned, because the people they asked for, Mushtaq Zargar, Maulana Masood Azhar, Omar Saeed Sheikh, all three hardcore terrorists. And we know that even after this, these terrorists acted against India. So, to my point of
view, as I said, they even delayed my reaching Lahore so that the flight took off initially. So you not expect from the Pakistanis anything better than what we faced.
But Ambassador, if I may, is there anything that the Indian government could have done differently?
Look, it's easy to sit back after the incident, but when the incident occurs, you have all sorts of new factors which come in. And as I said, for example, in my own case, flying me to Lahore, they denied me in a very ruthless way. So Pakistan government was in the act. The second point I have some reservations about was they asked for the release of Mushtaq Zargar, Maulana Masood Azhar, and Omar Saeed Sheikh. Three of the most hardcore anti-Indian terrorists under the guidance of the ISI. So I can't even now believe that all this happened and they tried their best. There's a lot of rubbish. We have learned to stop to criticizing ourselves. We made I give it to people who came. I sent one of my own officers, Ghanshyam Jain, my service colleague Karju, who headed the Pakistan desk, came from there, and we worked as a team in difficult conditions. As I said, the fact is that they were playing a duplicitous game. My only quarrel has that I think we agreed in a bit of a hurry to their proposal to release these four.
Okay.
We could have
Pradeep,
go, but that's not factual. That's my instinct.
No,
the people negotiate.
The problem is, and as Mohan Kumar Mangalam said, if you're accusing the filmmakers, in this case Anubhav Sinha and team, of whitewashing the terrorists, there's also an attempt to whitewash the response of the government. There are very valid questions being asked as to why didn't they stop the plane in Amritsar? Why didn't they storm the plane in Amritsar? The moment the plane was wheels up from Amritsar, it could have flown anywhere, to Lahore, Kandahar, wherever. I mean, there's no justification for that.
Zaka, just to, before answering that, just to tell your viewers that, imagine a situation that a hardcore dreaded terrorist who is responsible for planning so many terror attacks in the country, that terrorist is shown playing Antakshari in a plane with the passengers. Can you imagine that? My primary argument, again I say, do we forget this man Rupin Katyal? He was recently married. His throat was slit and he was murdered there in the plane. He was not given a medical help. My question is the argument which was said of humanizing, oh, he was from Harvard. How does it matter if a terrorist is from Harvard or any place? The bottom line is a terrorist and we should not have human emotions attached with terrorists. And if we do that, we would have never done a surgical strike across the border or a Balakot. And
but
that
Pradeep,
same mindset.
If there are no human emotions attached, then why were those 3 terrorists released? You released those 3 terrorists because of human emotions attached.
That is to do with the safety of our passengers.
Yeah,
I am
that's
talking
because of
about
human
emotions associated with terrorists. I will not have any human emotions associated with a man like Ajmal Kasab, who at that time, if you remember Rakesh Maria, what did Rakesh Maria said? Had Kasab not been caught, he would be branded as a Hindu terrorist. And Congress party is talking about propaganda party, which called Uri a propaganda film, Kashmir File
when
a
you're
propaganda
saying
film.
Don't have any human associations
With
or human emotions, I agree with you.
Yes.
So then why was the decision taken to release 3 terrorists based on those human emotions? The reason why those 3 terrorists were released were because the government at that time did not want any bloodshed. They wanted the safety of 170 passengers.
Of our civilians. But the government of the day did not brand terrorists as, innocent human beings trying to play Antakshari with the passengers, or terrorists having a peace motive, and because of circumstances they became terrorists. That is what I am questioning, and this is why I'll give you another example. Please note it, and this is why am I quoting Ajmal Kasab. This man was caught, and Rakesh Maria in his book clearly stated that had Kasab not been caught, he would be branded as a Hindu terrorist. Please ask the Congress party, what did Congress party did after 26/11? It is the same mindset which is seen in the panel, that it started to give dossiers was exchanged, but was a surgical strike done? No, not a surgical strike. Were terrorist attack across the border? No.
Mohan Kumar Mangalam, the larger point that folks like Pradeep are trying to make is, when the Congress was in power, and even now, there's a Congress ecosystem which is trying to normalize and whitewash terrorists. Stuff like Manmohan Singh saying that both Pakistan and India are victims of terror. Yes. Films like Veer Zara, Bajrangi Bhaijaan making it out to be that Pakistanis are great people. Navjot Singh Sidhu going and hugging General Bajwa at that time, who was the army chief. All of these things making Burhan Wani into some kind of a headmaster son, and so on and so forth. There is an attempt to normalize terrorism and Pakistan-backed terrorism. That's the accusation from Pradeep.
The year that this hijack happened, Vajpayee ji had made multiple overtures to the Pakistani government. And regardless of who our Prime Minister has been, there have always been attempts from the Indian side to be conciliatory and to find a peaceful medium with our neighbors. And that is the responsible thing to do. I'm not here to, use the same bluster and the whataboutery that the BJP spokesperson does. That's what they come here for. They don't talk sense most of the time. And I have to say that regardless of which Prime Minister, as responsible Indian heads of state, our job is to try and maintain peace with our neighbors. It just so happens, unfortunately, that our neighbors aren't run by a real government. They're run by the ISI or they're run by the military. And so we fail every time we make those overtures. But it doesn't fall on us, it falls on us rather. It's incumbent on us to keep trying to find a peaceful state with them.
No, but Mohan, you still haven't answered my question. The
I didn't make,
accusation
Zaka,
of Congress
Zaka,
governments
Zaka.
trying
Okay, I'll answer your
to
question.
normalize what is an abnormal relationship.
10 seconds.
That.
Zaka, those questions, Zaka. We didn't sponsor or make Bajrangi Bhaijan, but the Kerala story, Kashmir files, accidental prime minister, they are the experts of propaganda.
Yes.
I mean,
So
come on. I mean,
Hindus is propaganda for them.
to
Humanizing a
shame by the
terrorist is not a
BJP.
propaganda.
They
for them.
finally have a movie that has come out that has actually worked against them. And let me tell you that the Congress party has nothing to do with this web series either. So we don't go out and try and make people.
Okay, 10 seconds, Pradeep, and then I want to go back to Mr.
Just
Sharma.
a 10-second rebuttal to Mohan. I think the difference is clearly here in the panel. We do not talk to the terrorists. These are the individuals who believe in getting peace by talking to the terrorists. That is why after 26...
But Pradeep, this entire series is based on your government talking to the terrorists. This entire series.
I'm telling you the difference. Our government at that time had spoken to the terrorists because they were innocent hostages in the aircraft. After 26/11, did they do a surgical strike across the border? No. We carried out a surgical strike across the border. We carried out Balakot. Point number one. And for them, a killing of innocent Kashmiri Hindus in the valley is propaganda. For us, that is not a propaganda.
Okay.
They, for 70 years in Jammu and Kashmir, they could not neutralize JKLF and they are telling us that they want peace.
Mr. Sharma,
all you do is say
Mohan, 1 second. I want to go back to Mr. Sharma because, you know, one part of it is because this series is based on the book written by Captain Devi Sharan, so it's possible that the larger view in the book and certainly in the series is more sympathetic to the actions of the captain and the crew. But there are some very serious questions. And because you were on board, I want to know what was the thinking on board at that time, because the plane was in Amritsar for a good 45 minutes. What were the circumstances that led the pilot and the crew to take the call that they will fly out of Indian airspace, that they will fly out of Amritsar? The series shows that NSG was prepared to come. They would have taken an hour or so to get to Amritsar. I believe the Punjab Police Commandos were also there at the Amritsar airport. And I'll be speaking to General Malik a little later on in the program. I'll broadcast a part of that conversation where he says even Army Commandos were sent to the Amritsar airport. They reached the airport. Can you throw some light on why there was no storming operation and why the captain decided to leave Amritsar within 45 minutes?
See, that was that was a definite failure on the government's part because they had no crisis management action to be taken and they didn't know what to do, who to. So the local SHO of that area has the authority to allow the plane to be stormed. I'm sure if they had stormed the plane in Amritsar, maybe some of our lives would have been lost, but this fiasco wouldn't have happened. The Kandahar fiasco was really terrible. It was horrible. And they didn't know nothing. Like, coincidentally, I had my grandparents, they were from Kabul. And as kids, we used to go to Afghanistan in our summer holidays, and we went to Kandahar to see the Buddha Bamia, which the Taliban destroyed. So when we landed into Kandahar finally, the co-pilot was sitting right across me in the aisle, and the pilot was sitting in front of him. And I asked him, "Where are we?" He just told me to keep quiet. I asked him again, "Where are we?" Because we got some biscuits with the kind of Arabic marking, and I had some feeling we are in Afghanistan. So he says, "We are in Kandahar, Iran." I said, "My friend, you're the navigator, the co-pilot. We are not in Kandahar, Iran. We are in Kandahar, Afghanistan, and this is Taliban land. So we are trapped. There's nothing nobody can do about it."
So
it was total. It was actually, we were not equipped. We were just not equipped to handle this kind of a situation.
So, but now when you look back, and I know that in the first answer, you took a slightly more nonchalant view of what had happened, 20, 24 years ago. Is there anything that could have been done differently, either by the cabin crew, the captain, the people who were on board, or for that matter, the government of that day?
See, the security, firstly, to say in Kathmandu, the flight was delayed by 4 or 5 hours. And we had time to go back in the city, to the city. There was no security. Nobody was stopping us. When we came back, we had our boarding passes in hand and we just walked through. It was like an open gateway. It was all very well planned and it was very kind of, it was an eerie and a sinister kind of an atmosphere over there, which we found very, very strange. But however, since I'm a frequent flyer and I used to travel to Kathmandu for my work, I didn't ever realize that this is what's going to happen, that this is what's in store. But yes, we definitely should have been more equipped. And there should have been some air marshal, something to protect us, because we were totally at their mercy. When we landed into Kandahar, all of a sudden, right from one pistol, one knife, and one hand grenade, which I don't know was real or one was not real, all of a sudden the cockpit was filled with arms and walkie-talkies and all kind of ammunition you can think of. So it was a total failure. And what I saw in the series, that they were already informed, they were being informed by the intelligence that there's going to be a hijack attempt.
Yeah.
That was before the flight took off. And nobody took any action on that. I think that's very shameful.
All right. Okay,
Quite
Mr.
shameful.
Sharma. A quick response, Pradeep, and then I'll give the final word to
On this, just let
Ambassador.
me quote the statistics, because the OSD at the MEA, Mr. Kanchan Gupta, quoted on this that the hijackers were anticipating commando action. First stabbed the passenger Rupin Katiyar. Had they not extended their stay by a couple of days, they would have killed passengers further. They showed that they meant business, and that is what had forced the pilot to take off from Amritsar.
Okay.
So Rupin Katiyar's killing happened when the flight was at Amritsar.
Can I ask Ambassador Patsarthi? We are today in a situation where about a year ago, less than a year ago, 240 hostages were picked up from Israel, and they are even today there are over 100 hostages who are in the custody of Hamas. 6 of them were killed just over this weekend, and yet the Israeli government is not willing to settle for any kind of ceasefire deal, not willing to settle for any kind of a swap of hostages versus prisoners kind of a deal. Do you think we would ever get to that position, if God forbid we find ourselves in a hostage situation again, that a government will be able to put its foot down and say, nothing doing, we're not going to engage with terrorists?
Firstly, I do not wish to emulate Israel, given the reputation it now has, following what is happening to the Palestinians. The second point is that, look, I think you should look at the end result, not just what happened. We've got all these 4 guys either bumped off or whatever. We have now reduced Pakistani terrorism and virtually brought it to its knees.
Yes.
All this cannot happen in a day. Dealing with terrorists operating from a country which chooses to be inimical takes time. And you don't do things in a hurry. I think in this particular case, yes, there could have been some few mistakes made here and there. But the fact of the matter is, those mistakes were made in the context of the limited facilities and electronics equipment that we have. That has been improving with the passage of time.
Okay.
So I am not given to blaming people for what happened. But I am happy that in the long run, we finished off these guys. It's taken time. And we are now in a position where they're feeling the heat.
All right. Okay.
At that point in time, when I was there, it was a totally different situation. I mean, the Pakistanis were on the rampage. It's taken us 3 decades to stop that.
Okay, so
These
you're
are
saying
not problems
it's
you
taken us
can
3
get-
decades to stop it, but finally today we are in a much better position to deal with such a situation if it arises. Thank you very much to all our guests. I also want to play out that excerpt of the conversation which I was referring to. I spoke with former Army Chief General VP Malik. He was the Chief of Army Staff at that time. He was the helm of the Indian Army during this hijacking in 1999. This is what General Malik had to say, and this is, I don't know if he said this before, but he certainly said this in this conversation, where he said that even army commandos, he was first informed of the hijacking about an hour into it. The then vice chief had called him and said that this has happened. Army commandos had been sent to the Amritsar airport at that time. those commandos were refused permission to enter the Amritsar airport by the Punjab police because the instructions that were given to them at that time was that the Punjab police is good enough to deal with the situation. Let me play out that excerpt. I'm now joined by the then Chief of Army Staff, General Ved Prakash Malik. Thank you very much, General Malik, for speaking with us. I want you to sort of recount the events that happened at that time, because one of the accusations against the makers of this new series, and I don't know if you've gotten a chance to see the whole series, is that they were whitewashing the crimes of the hijackers, the fact that they were Pakistanis, Pakistan-backed and trained terrorists. The accusation against the makers of this series is there's a bit of whitewashing going on. Were you at any point of time when the events played out in the last week of December 1999, was there any doubt in your mind that this was done at the behest of and by ISI-backed terrorists?
Firstly, Zaka, the film has been, the series has been based on these actions. I mean, that's what they have written. So I don't think everything that they have shown is right. They may, it all depends on us how we want to see it. But coming to your main question as to what happened really, let me just narrate. On that particular day when it was hijacked, the Vice Chief of the Air Staff, he rang me up. I think the time must have been about 6 o'clock. And he said that the plane has been hijacked and 814 has been hijacked and it is going towards Lahore. And that was the first time. And then after half an hour, again, he rang up. He says that the plane is not being permitted to land at Lahore and it might come to Amritsar. It was just a, conversation between the two of us. So I, on my own, I sent a few troops from the Amritsar cantonment to go to the airport and be available in case they are required. And I also informed Rajesh Mishra, who was the NSA, that look, although we have not been informed about it, we have not been told, but we are available in case you need any advice or any action from the armed forces. I was Chairman, Chiefs of Staff Committee also at that time. And the Air Chief was not present in Delhi. That's why the Vice Chief of the Air Staff was speaking to me. But nothing happened. And later on, I was told our troops could not enter Raja Sansi Airport in Amritsar because the police said, no, the army is not required and NSG will come and negotiate with the terrorists. By that time, the plane had landed. So for the next 2 days, I think we were not called. And then after 2 days, the Prime Minister rang me up and he said that, look, you haven't come to see me. I said, sir, you haven't called us. So we went there. And after that, of course, we were attending the CCS meetings, all three of us, the Army, Navy and Air Force chiefs. The pressure was tremendous. I think the film is showing the pressure that was on the pilot and also the people who were negotiating at Kandahar. But I think they haven't shown adequate filming of the pressure which was in Delhi. There was a lot of agitation, not only by the relations of the passengers, but many others, and there was a lot of media pressure also. So next few days that we were having this meeting, of course, we learned that they wanted 35 or 36 terrorists to be released, some money to be released and all that, which we kept on saying no, no, no to that. And a couple of times I had to tell them, I said, look, to catch one terrorist, it takes us so much of time and so much of sacrifice at times. So we should not release anybody. That carried on for a few days. And in order to avoid the pressure that was building up, I remember at one stage, Prime Minister wanted to speak to the war widows also, because, they had faced a lot of pressure themselves and they had been in a worse situation really. And so that also happened.
So, General Malik, so there was no requisitioning either from the Prime Minister's office, the Cabinet Secretary, National Security Advisor at that time, any of those gentlemen asking you and the services of Army commandos to try and storm this plane for the brief time that it was in Amritsar?
No. No, in fact, the troops who had gone to Raja Sansi Airport also returned because they were told that they are not required and it is only the NSG will be. And, those days, the crisis management group headed by the cabinet secretary was functioning, and none of the armed forces officers were members of that. In fact, one of the outcome of this whole episode was that I had to put pressure on the Prime Minister that they must include the crisis management group must have some senior officers from the armed forces, which was accepted. And thereafter, the 3 vice chiefs were made members of that crisis management group. But during that period, none of our army people, our armed forces people were members. So and we were not asked to do anything.
How do you speak to these charges now that the makers of this series are facing, that they've whitewashed the actions of the hijackers, whitewashed terror, they've downplayed the role of the ISI and the Pakistani backers of these hijackers? Do you see any merit in those charges, or this is a work of quasi-fiction and therefore the makers have the license to do that?
See, when the makers of this series, they say that it is based on that story, you really cannot say whether it is. All I can say is that it's not entire truth, but a fair amount of truth. That's all that I can say, because they themselves have said that it is based on these actual happenings.
Correct.
So I think they have managed to get away with this aspect. But I have absolute no doubt that all this was happening because of the ISI pressure.
And you were convinced about that right from the first time you got that phone call from the Vice Chief of Air Staff at that time that Pakistan and the ISI was behind this. You were convinced about it.
Absolutely no doubt about it. Don't forget, at that time, Pervez Musharraf had already taken over the Pakistan. He had already done that coup, and he was a martial law administrator at that time. So whatever was happening was known to him, and also they were in league with the then regime in Afghanistan.
All right.
And all those things that happened thereafter, during the negotiations and after that, there is no doubt at all that Pakistan and Afghanistan were working together on this whole episode.
All right, General Malik, it's always a pleasure speaking with you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us here on CNN News 18.
Presented by